Deep within the misty embrace of the Blue Ridge Mountains, where ancient pines stood sentinel against a timeless landscape, and nature's laws held an unyielding sway, a singular act of profound compassion was poised to irrevocably alter the course of two lives. Martin Montez Henderson, a man whose weathered hands cradled a steaming mug of coffee, inhaled deeply, savoring the hard-won tranquility that decades of diligent work had finally afforded him. But the relentless wilderness harbored its own dramatic script. A faint, desperate cry carried on the fragile tendrils of the morning breeze sliced through the stillness. It was not merely another sound of the forest. Driven by an instinct he couldn't ignore, Montez followed the sound, his heart pounding with a premonition. There, amidst the dense undergrowth, he discovered a shivering bobcat kitten, its tiny body frail and abandoned, locked in a desperate struggle against impossible odds. For this small, clouded-eyed creature, Montez represented either its last vestige of hope or merely a fleeting witness to its inevitable demise. What unfolds when the untamed wilderness deposits its most vulnerable directly into your path? This is a poignant tale of boundaries blurred between the wild and the tame, between the impulse to help and the wisdom of letting go. And sometimes, in the act of saving a life, you can never foresee the extraordinary consequences that lie in wait. The morning fog, a spectral shroud, clung to the towering pines of the Blue Ridge Mountains, painting the forest in an ethereal, dreamlike luminescence. Martin Montez Henderson, a man of 58 years, with hair the color of salt and pepper, and hands etched with the stories of decades spent meticulously crafting exquisite furniture, finally indulged in a long-anticipated 2-week retreat on his cabin porch. His younger brother Dale was expected later that day. And together, they envisioned days filled with the simple pleasures of fishing, hiking, and basking in the profound tranquility that had eluded them both amidst their demanding work lives. 6 months in the making. Montez murmured to himself, stretching his weary legs and absorbing the breathtaking vista. The cabin, nestled within a secluded clearing embraced by ancient oaks and maples, offered an unparalleled vantage point to observe the raw beauty of the wilderness. As a lifelong woodworker, Montez felt an almost spiritual connection to these forests, deeply appreciating the very essence of the material that had sustained his livelihood and fueled his enduring passion for so many years. He was about to retreat inside when a sound, faint yet piercingly pitiful, drifted on the morning air. Initially, he dismissed it as the call of a bird, but an unsettling urgency in the cry resonated deep within him. Montez gently placed his mug on the porch, railing his brow, furrowed in concern, and cocked his head, straining to listen. There it was again, a weak, mewing cry that tugged relentlessly at his heartstrings. Slipping on his worn leather boots and instinctively grabbing a flashlight. Despite the growing daylight, Montez descended the porch steps, his senses on high alert, and followed the sound towards a dense thicket of underbrush approximately 50 yards from the cabin. As he drew closer, the cries became more distinct, yet no less feeble, each whimper a desperate plea. Carefully pushing aside a tangled curtain of thorny brambles, Montez's breath hitched in his throat as he discovered the source of the distress, a tiny, trembling bobcat kitten no larger than the span of his calloused hand. "Well, hello there, little one," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, as he crouched down for a closer inspection. The kitten's condition was profoundly alarming. Its delicate ribs protruded sharply beneath a dull matted coat, a stark testament to starvation. One of its hind legs appeared grotesquely twisted, and most disturbingly, its eyes were clouded over, unfocused and weeping with a viscous infection. The tiny creature shrank back at the sound of Montez's voice, a flicker of wild instinct, but lacked the strength to flee. When it attempted to hiss, The sound emerged as nothing more than a pathetic, raspy wheeze. Overwhelmed by a surge of protectiveness, Monte swiftly removed his thick flannel shirt, leaving him in just his undershirt, despite the morning chill that still clung to the air. With the practiced gentleness honed through years of handling delicate wood, he carefully wrapped the frail kitten in the soft fabric. The poor creature barely struggled its weakness, a heartbreaking testament to its dire straits. "Where's your mama, little bobcat?" Montes wondered aloud, his gaze sweeping the surrounding area for any sign of an adult bobcat. Finding none, a cold dread settled in his stomach. This kitten had been abandoned, either callously discarded by a mother who recognized its inability to survive, or orphaned by some unseen tragedy that had befallen its protector. Back inside the cozy warmth of the cabin, Montes gently placed the bundled kitten in a makeshift bed, a cardboard box lined with a soft, worn towel. His mind raced, and he immediately reached for his phone. The closest town, Asheville, lay approximately an hour's drive away, and he desperately hoped there would be a veterinarian who could offer a lifeline. After a series of increasingly frantic calls, a glimmer of hope emerged when he connected with Dr. Eliza Wilder, a wildlife veterinarian associated with the esteemed Carolina Wildlife Conservation Center. "I'd say bring the kitten in immediately, but from what you're describing, it might not even survive the journey." "Butcha." Dr. Wilder explained, her voice laced with concern after Montes recounted the kitten's precarious condition. "I can meet you halfway. There's a gas station off Highway 26 Miller's Stop. I can be there in 30 minutes. I'll head out now." Montes agreed without hesitation, already grabbing his keys and wallet, a renewed sense of purpose surging through him. Just as he was about to rush out the door, the familiar rumble of his brother Dale's truck echoed up the gravel driveway. Dale, 5 years younger than Monte, but bearing the same sturdy build and kind, thoughtful eyes, emerged from the vehicle, a cooler in one hand and a fishing rod in the other. "Caught you trying to sneak off fishing without me." Dale joked, his voice light, before his gaze fell upon the profound concern etched on his brother's face. "What's wrong?" Montes swiftly explained the heart-wrenching situation, carefully showing Dale the tiny, weakened kitten nestled in the box. "Mart, that's a wild animal," Dale cautioned, using his brother's given name, his brow furrowed with worry. "Even if you could save it, what then? It's not a house cat." "I know that." Montes replied gently, his voice firm, yet tender, as he adjusted the towel around the trembling creature. "But I can't just let it die. Not when there's a chance." Dale sighed, recognizing the familiar, unwavering determination in his brother's eyes. The same resolute look Montes had worn when he insisted on tirelessly caring for their mother during her final agonizing months battling cancer, or when he'd spent countless sleepless nights painstakingly rebuilding his beloved workshop after a devastating fire. "All right, then," Dale conceded, setting down his fishing gear and cooler with a sigh of resignation. "I'll drive. You just keep that little wildcat comfortable." Dr. Eliza Wilder was younger than Montes had anticipated, likely in her mid-30s, with short-cropped black hair that framed a face of focused intensity, and alert brown eyes that immediately locked onto the box cradled in Montes' arms as he approached her vehicle at the bustling Miller's Stop. "Let me see," she said without preamble, her movements swift and efficient as she gently took the box and placed it on the hood of her Subaru. With practiced expertise, she began her examination, her expression growing increasingly somber as she carefully checked the kitten's clouded eyes. "Male bobcat, probably about 6 weeks old." She murmured, her voice low and concerned, as she administered a small injection, explaining it was a broad-spectrum antibiotic. "Severe malnutrition, dehydration, infected eyes. And yes, I'm deeply concerned about the vision. The infection has progressed significantly. Will he make it? Montes asked, his voice tight with anxiety, his gaze fixed on the tiny creature. Dr. Wilder straightened up, fixing Montes with a direct, unwavering gaze. I want to be honest with you, Mr. Henderson. The odds aren't good. This little one would normally go to our rehabilitation center, but in this condition... She paused, her voice heavy with the weight of her experience. Moving him again could be too stressful. Are you willing to care for him at your cabin for a few days? I can provide everything you need and specific instructions. Once he's stabilized, we can reassess. Montes didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. Of course, whatever it takes. Dr. Wilder nodded, a flicker of relief in her eyes, seemingly satisfied with his immediate commitment. I'll follow you back to your cabin with the supplies. We'll set up a proper care station, and I'll show you exactly what to do. During the tense drive back to the secluded cabin, Dale cast his brother a wry sideways glance. You realize our long-awaited fishing trip just morphed into a full-blown Bobcat nursery operation, right? Montes managed a small, weary smile, his hand resting protectively on the box that held the fragile life. Life has a funny way of changing plans. The next 48 hours dissolved into a frantic blur of activity. Dr. Wilder remained at the cabin for several crucial hours that first day, patiently instructing the brothers on how to prepare the specialized formula for infant wild felines, meticulously demonstrating the delicate feeding technique using a small syringe, and carefully explaining the administration of the various medications to combat the kitten's raging infections and alleviate his evident pain. Eye infections like this are particularly dangerous. She explained, her brow furrowed with concern as she gently applied medicated drops to the kitten's cloudy eyes. Bobcats rely heavily on their vision for hunting. If the damage is permanent... She didn't need to complete the devastating thought. Before departing, she helped them create a safe and comfortable recovery space in a quiet corner of the cabin. A large plastic storage container lined with soft, comforting blankets, a heating pad placed beneath one half to allow the tiny creature to regulate its own delicate body temperature, and a small, well-loved stuffed animal that Montes had discovered tucked away in the cabin's storage closet, a forgotten relic of a previous visitor's child. Call me any time, day or night, Dr. Wilder instructed, handing Montes her business card with her personal cell phone number underlined. The next 72 hours are critical. If he makes it through that, we have a fighting chance. That first night, Montes set his alarm to rouse him every 3 hours. At each painstaking feeding, he gently woke the tiny kitten, who would initially offer a weak defensive hiss before grudgingly accepting the life-sustaining nourishment. Dale, ever the supportive brother, took over the daytime shifts, allowing Montes to snatch precious hours of desperately needed sleep. Still don't know why you're knocking yourself out for a wild animal, Dale commented on the second day, though his tone lacked its initial skepticism, as he gently stroked the kitten's soft back with a single careful finger. Montes observed his brother's surprisingly tender interaction with the fragile creature and offered a knowing smile, but wisely remained silent. By the dawn of the third day, the kitten, whom they had affectionately started calling Skunky, due to a distinctive stripe pattern on his forehead that bore an uncanny resemblance to a skunk's, displayed small but undeniably encouraging signs of improvement. He was eagerly consuming more formula at each feeding, his shallow breathing seemed less labored, and the angry inflammation around his infected eyes appeared subtly less intense. Dr. Wilder returned on the fourth day, her arrival a beacon of hope, bringing more essential supplies and conducting a thorough examination of Skunky. He's responding to the antibiotics, which is excellent. She confirmed, her expression cautiously optimistic. His weight has improved slightly too, but I'm still deeply concerned about his eyes." She performed a series of visual tests, moving her finger back and forth in front of Skunky's face, shining a small pen light near his clouded pupils, and intently observing his lack of reaction. The stark absence of any response confirmed their worst fears. "The infection has caused significant damage," she explained gently, her voice filled with compassion. "I believe he's nearly or completely blind. Even if we manage to save him, he can never be released back into the wild." A cold wave of despair washed over Montes. "What happens to him then?" Dr. Wilder sighed, her gaze softening as she looked at the tiny bobcat nestled against the stuffed animal in his makeshift enclosure, his frail body finally relaxed in a peaceful slumber. "Normally, in cases of permanent disability like this, we have to make difficult decisions." Her words hung heavy in the air. "A blind predator cannot survive in the wild, and our rehabilitation center has limited resources for permanent residents." "You mean he would be euthanized?" Dale asked, his voice blunt, reflecting the harsh reality of the situation. Dr. Wilder nodded reluctantly, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. "That is often the most humane option for wild animals with severe disabilities. There has to be another way." Montes insisted, his gaze unwavering, as he watched Skunky's peaceful slumber. "Well," Dr. Wilder said hesitantly, a flicker of an idea in her eyes, "there are rare exceptions. Some specialized wildlife education centers occasionally accept disabled native animals for their educational programs. And in very special circumstances, there are permits available for private individuals with proper facilities and extensive experience to care for non-releasable wildlife. But those are extremely difficult to obtain, and the requirements are incredibly stringent." Montes fell silent for a moment, his mind racing, grappling with the implications of those daunting requirements. As the days turned into a week, Skunky continued his slow but steady physical recovery. His dull coat began to regain a healthy sheen, his tiny body grew stronger, and the persistent infection gradually subsided, though as they had feared, his vision did not return. Dr. Wilder's subsequent examination confirmed the devastating truth: he was completely blind in his right eye and possessed only minimal light perception in his left. What was truly remarkable, however, was the extraordinary way Skunky began to adapt to his sightless world. He started to navigate his enclosure with increasing confidence, relying heavily on his other heightened senses, particularly his acute hearing and sensitive whiskers. Montes observed with growing fascination how the tiny bobcat would tilt his head, his ears twitching intently, listening to pinpoint the precise source of even the faintest sounds. By the end of the first week, Skunky had seemingly memorized the entire layout of his temporary home and could move around with surprising agility and grace. "He's compensating," Dr. Wilder explained during a hopeful phone consultation. "Young animals are incredibly adaptable. Their brains can actually rewire themselves to enhance other senses when one is lost." Inspired by Skunky's resilience, Montes began experimenting with subtle sound cues. A soft, distinct whistle just before feeding time, a gentle tap on the floor when approaching his enclosure, and different vocal tones for various activities. Skunky, with his remarkable intelligence, quickly learned to associate these auditory signals with specific events, responding appropriately each time. "He's smarter than half the contractors I've ever worked with," Montes joked to Dale, who had become equally invested in Skunky's care despite his initial reservations. By the 10th day of their vacation, which had undergone a complete transformation from a relaxing fishing retreat into an intense wildlife rehabilitation mission, Montes had made a profound decision. He spent countless hours on the phone with wildlife authorities, meticulously researching the stringent permit requirements and consulting extensively with Dr. Wilder about the daunting possibility of becoming Skunky's permanent caretaker. The requirements are substantial. He confided in Dale one quiet evening as they watched Skunky tentatively exploring a larger, more stimulating enclosure they had painstakingly constructed in the cabin's living room. I need to significantly modify my property's secure special permits, undergo extensive training, commit to regular veterinary checkups, adhere to strict dietary plans. It's essentially transforming a significant portion of my home into a licensed wildlife sanctuary. Dale, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration, gently washed his brother's tired face. "You're really considering this, aren't you?" Montes nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I've been thinking about scaling back my furniture business anyway. Maybe taking on fewer custom pieces, focusing more on teaching woodworking instead of high-volume production. This feels like, I don't know, the right next chapter somehow." Dale offered a warm, understanding smile. Since his painful divorce 5 years earlier, Montes had poured all his considerable energy into his work crafting exquisite furniture pieces that were highly sought after throughout Virginia and beyond, but often at the expense of his own well-being. This vulnerable, sightless Bobcat Kitten had unexpectedly awakened something deep within his brother, a sense of purpose that had lain dormant for far too long. A profound connection to something wild and real, something beyond the meticulous precision of his craft. "Well," Dale said, clapping his brother on the shoulder with genuine support, "if anyone can turn their home into a bobcat sanctuary, it's you. And I suppose I could lend a hand with some of the construction when I'm off duty." Toker Howery. Dale, a dedicated firefighter in Richmond, had always been surprisingly handy with tools himself, though he readily admitted he lacked his brother's artistic finesse. The final days of their unexpectedly transformative vacation were spent making crucial arrangements. Dr. Wilder, a tireless advocate for Skunky's well-being, connected Montes with experienced wildlife officials who could guide him through the complex permit process. She also introduced him to a seasoned wildlife rehabilitator in rural Virginia who had extensive experience caring for blind predators and could serve as a valuable mentor. "It won't be easy," she cautioned during her final visit to check on Skunky before the brothers' departure. "Bobcats, even those raised by humans, retain their fierce wild instincts. As he matures, he'll become more challenging to manage, and with his profound disability, he'll require constant environmental consistency and significant enrichment to thrive." "I understand," Montes assured her, his gaze soft, as he watched Skunky playfully batting at a feather toy Dale was gently dangling above his enclosure. "But I think we've already formed a connection. He trusts me." Dr. Wilder smiled, observing the tender way Skunky leaned into Montes's hand when he gently stroked the kitten's velvety back. "Yes?" She agreed quietly, a hint of wonder in her voice. "I believe he does. That's rare and truly special with a wild animal, especially a solitary species like a bobcat." The carefully planned journey back to Virginia was undertaken with meticulous care. They constructed a special secure travel crate that would ensure Skunky's safety and comfort during the 6-hour drive. Dr. Wilder provided a mild sedative to minimize the stress of travel, though they ultimately used only a minimal dose, as Skunky remained surprisingly calm throughout the entire journey, particularly soothed by the reassuring sound of Montes's voice nearby. Upon their arrival back at his modest craftsman-style home, nestled on 3 acres of tranquil wooded land, Montes immediately set to work preparing a temporary indoor enclosure in his spare bedroom. Meanwhile, plans for a proper, spacious outdoor facility began to take shape. The property offered ample space for an appropriate enclosure that would provide Skunky with a semblance of a natural environment while ensuring his complete safety. The permit process proved to be as rigorous and demanding as Dr. Wilder had warned. It involved multiple exhaustive inspections, an overwhelming mountain of bureaucratic paperwork, and several intensive courses that Monte diligently completed on wildlife care and management. Dr. Wilder provided crucial documentation detailing Skunky's profound disability and her professional assessment that he was unequivocally non-releasable into the wild. Throughout these challenging weeks, Skunky continued to defy all expectations, thriving under Montez's unwavering care. By now, nearly 12 weeks old, he had grown significantly. Though he remained slightly smaller than typical for his age, a lingering reminder of his precarious start in life. His unique personality began to emerge more fully each day. Playful and endearingly curious during the bright mornings, exhibiting a quiet dignity and keen observational skills in the peaceful afternoons, and displaying surprising bursts of affection in the quiet evenings, often curling up contentedly near Monte as he worked on intricate sketches for his furniture designs, or lost himself in the pages of a book. Montes himself became increasingly fascinated by bobcat behavior, voraciously devouring books and online resources dedicated to the elusive species. He learned that wild bobcats were primarily solitary, fiercely territorial animals that typically avoided all human contact. Yet Skunky, perhaps due to his early rescue and profound blindness, displayed a unique blend of ingrained wild instinct and learned domesticated comfort. "He's in a category all his own," remarked Dr. H. Carl Lawson, the local exotic animal veterinarian, who had taken over Skunky's ongoing care. "Not truly wild, not entirely tame, but somewhere in between and entirely dependent on you because of his disability." This extraordinary, unprecedented relationship became even more apparent as Skunky matured. He retained typical bobcat behaviors, meticulously scent-marking his indoor territory, engaging in playful pouncing techniques on imaginary prey, and occasionally letting out surprisingly impressive growls when unexpectedly startled. But he also developed behaviors that seemed specifically adapted to his life with Montes. Most remarkably, Skunky learned to navigate the house with uncanny accuracy by following the sound of Montes's footsteps, tracking him faithfully from room to room. He even developed distinct vocalizations to communicate his specific needs. A soft chirping sound when he was hungry, a low, gentle rumble when he craved attention, and a distinctive, playful trill when interacting with his favorite toys. By the time 6 months had passed since that fateful rescue in the Blue Ridge Mountains, Montes had successfully completed all the demanding requirements and finally received his coveted special wildlife rehabilitation permit. With Dale's invaluable help during his days off from the firehouse, they constructed a spacious and enriching outdoor enclosure seamlessly connected to the house via a specially designed bobcat door that only Skunky could access with his unique microchip collar. The enclosure incorporated natural elements like sturdy logs, weathered rocks, and indigenous plants, along with carefully crafted climbing structures that Montes designed and built himself. Most importantly, the entire space was thoughtfully designed with Skunky's blindness in mind. Consistent placement of key features, textured pathways that helped him navigate by feel and auditory landmarks, like a small recirculating stream that provided constant sonic cues. As Skunky approached his first birthday, he had grown into a stunning, if somewhat undersized, bobcat. His coat gleamed with vibrant health, his muscles were sleek and powerful beneath his luxurious fur. And to anyone unaware of his profound disability, his blindness wasn't immediately apparent, a testament to his remarkable adaptations. Word of Mante's unusual charge, the blind bobcat thriving in his care, gradually spread throughout the close-knit community. Initially reluctant to share his deeply personal story, Montes eventually began accepting visitors, mostly local school children and passionate wildlife enthusiasts, who came to learn firsthand about the fascinating world of bobcats and the critical importance of wildlife conservation. Skunky, seemingly sensing the educational significance of these visits, displayed a surprising tolerance for small groups of respectful observers, often positioning himself prominently on a favorite sun-drenched perch, where visitors could observe him safely from a respectful distance. "He's become an ambassador," Dale remarked with a touch of pride during one such visit, watching as his brother patiently explained the intricate habitat needs of bobcats to a group of wide-eyed fourth graders. An ambassador for his species and for the incredible power of second chances. One crisp autumn morning, approximately 14 months after the life-altering rescue, Montes awoke before the first hint of dawn, his internal clock finely tuned to Skunky's routine. He brewed his strong coffee and settled into his favorite worn armchair near the sliding glass doors that overlooked the backyard and Skunky's spacious enclosure. In the faint pre-dawn light, he could just make out Skunky's familiar form perched on one of the elevated platforms. But something about the bobcat's posture struck Montes as profoundly unusual. Typically, Skunky would be completing his nocturnal patrol at this hour, diligently scent marking his territory before settling in for a well-deserved morning nap. Instead, he sat perfectly still, his head held high, facing the dense forest edge that bordered his enclosure with an intense, unwavering focus that seemed impossible for an animal with such limited vision. A wave of curiosity washing over him, Montes quietly slid open the glass door and stepped onto the cool porch. The crisp morning air carried the earthy scent of fallen leaves and the faint comforting aroma of distant wood smoke. As his eyes gradually adjusted to the dim light, Montes finally discerned what had so captivated Skunky's attention. At the very edge of the forest, partially concealed by a thick curtain of underbrush, stood a wild female bobcat. Montes froze his breath, catching in his throat, hardly daring to inhale. While bobcats weren't uncommon in the surrounding area, they were rarely seen, their elusive nature keeping them hidden from human observation. This one, a healthy adult female with distinctive pointed ear tufts and watchful, intelligent yellow eyes, seemed equally intrigued by Skunky's presence within the enclosure. For several long, tense minutes, the wild bobcat remained at the edge of the clearing, occasionally taking a few tentative steps closer, before cautiously retreating back into the shadows of the trees. Skunky remained utterly motionless on his platform, his sensitive nose working overtime, delicately capturing the scent of his wild counterpart, carried on the gentle breeze. Finally, as silently and mysteriously as she had appeared, the female bobcat melted back into the dense forest. Only then did Skunky visibly relax his tense posture, turning his head unerringly toward the sound of Montes's quiet breathing, as if suddenly aware of his human protector's presence. "You sensed her somehow, didn't you?" Montes murmured, his voice filled with wonder, as he slowly approached the enclosure. Skunky responded with a soft, contented chirp, rubbing his head affectionately against the wire mesh as Montes reached through to stroke his favorite spot behind his velvety ears. That evening, Montes eagerly called Dr. Lawson to share the extraordinary encounter. "It's not entirely surprising," she explained, her voice thoughtful. "Even with his significant vision impairment, his other senses are incredibly acute. He would have smelled and heard her long before you even noticed her presence. But why would a wild bobcat approach like that?" Mont wondered aloud, his mind buzzing with unanswered questions. Curiosity, perhaps, or territorial investigation. Bobcats are fiercely territorial, and she may have been aware of Skunky's presence in that area for quite some time. She paused, a hint of something more in her tone. It's also breeding season. The simple thought hadn't even crossed Montez's mind. Oh, well, don't worry, Dr. Lawson assured him with a gentle laugh. Your enclosure is secure. But don't be surprised if she returns. Wildlife often establishes routines, especially around reliable food sources and interesting stimuli. True to her prediction, over the next few weeks, the wild female bobcat made several more appearances at the edges of the property, usually at the quiet hours of dawn and dusk. Montez, captivated by her ghost-like ability to appear and disappear silently, began calling her Shadow. Each time Skunky would detect her presence, long before Montez did, assuming the same alert-focused posture on his elevated platform. Intrigued by this remarkable development, Montez set up a high-quality wildlife camera near the enclosure, hoping to capture these extraordinary interactions. The resulting footage revealed something truly astonishing. Shadow would often bring small prey items, a plump squirrel, a cottontail rabbit once, even a wild duck, and carefully leave them near the perimeter of the enclosure before silently departing. It's gift-giving behavior, Dr. Lawson explained, examining the captivating footage with genuine amazement. Highly unusual between unrelated adult bobcats. She's either trying to establish a potential mating relationship despite the obvious barrier. She hesitated, her voice trailing off slightly. Or what? Montez prompted, his curiosity piqued. This might sound far-fetched, but she could be trying to provide for him. Animals sometimes recognize disability in others of their kind. There have been documented cases of wild animals bringing food to injured members of their own species. Montez considered this profound possibility, a wave of understanding washing over him as he remembered how easily he himself had responded to Skunky's vulnerability that fateful morning in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Perhaps compassion, in its purest form, truly transcended more boundaries than humans often realized. Winter arrived with an unexpected ferocity that year. Heavy snowfalls blanketed the tranquil region, transforming the landscape into a pristine white wonderland, and temperatures plummeted to record-breaking lows. Montez diligently added extra heating elements to Skunky's enclosure, ensuring his comfort and carefully monitoring his well-being. Though the bobcat seemed to revel in the crisp, cold air, his thick winter coat growing even more luxurious, Shadow's visits became less frequent, as the weather worsened and the deep snow making travel through the forest more challenging. However, the ever-watchful wildlife camera occasionally captured her fleeting presence, her distinctive paw prints a silent testament to her continued presence in the area. Montez found himself increasingly worried about her during the particularly harsh storms, wondering how wild bobcats, so fiercely independent, managed to weather such brutal conditions. One particularly fierce night, as a raging blizzard howled outside, the wind gusts strong enough to rattle the very windows of the sturdy cabin, Montez was abruptly awakened by Skunky's distinctive alarm call. A sharp, urgent vocalization the bobcat rarely used. His heart pounding with a sudden premonition, Montez grabbed his powerful flashlight and made his way to the back door. The beam of light sliced through the swirling snow, illuminating Skunky pacing anxiously along the edge of his enclosure, closest to the darkened forest. Instinctively following the direction of the bobcat's intense focus, Montez swept the flashlight beam toward the snow-laden trees and caught a fleeting glimpse of movement near a large fallen log. There was Shadow, huddled against the massive trunk, barely visible through the driving snow. Something was clearly wrong. Her movement was labored, and she appeared to be limping severely, one front paw held awkwardly off the ground. Without a moment's hesitation, Montez pulled on his heaviest winter coat and thick, insulated boots. He knew approaching a wild bobcat, especially an injured one, was inherently dangerous. But the temperature had plummeted far below freezing. and in her compromised state, Shadow would undoubtedly not survive the long, brutal night in these unforgiving conditions. Moving slowly and deliberately through the knee-deep snow, Montes cautiously approached the injured bobcat, speaking in the same soft, reassuring tones he used with Skunky. Shadow watched him warily, her ears flattened against her head, but surprisingly made no attempt to flee. Whether out of a flicker of trust or sheer inability, Montes couldn't discern. As he drew closer, the heartbreaking reality became clear. Her front paw was caught in a small, cruel trap, likely set illegally by someone hunting on the outskirts of his property. A surge of anger, mixed with profound pity, welled up within him. But he forced himself to focus on the immediate, desperate need. Using his gloved hands and a small multi-tool he always kept tucked in his coat pocket, Montes carefully and methodically worked to release the cold, unforgiving mechanism of the trap. Shadow remained surprisingly calm throughout the agonizing process, though she let out a sharp hiss of pain. When the trap finally sprang open, freeing her injured limb. The paw was clearly injured, but thankfully not severely damaged. The trap had been small, likely intended for muskrats or similar small prey. Once freed, Montes fully expected Shadow to bolt into the sheltering wood's injured paw or not. Instead, she limped a few feet away, and then stopped, turning back to look at him with an expression that seemed to convey a strange mixture of fear and uncertainty. "You can't stay out here," Montes told her gently, knowing full well the utter foolishness of even considering trying to bring a wild bobcat indoors. Yet the alternative, leaving her to a slow, agonizing death in the blizzard, was simply unthinkable. Making a swift decision fueled by his unwavering compassion, Montes returned to the warm cabin and retrieved a large, sturdy pet carrier from the storage shed, part of the equipment he had acquired for Skunky's occasional veterinary visits. He also grabbed a thick, soft blanket and some of the raw meat he kept frozen for Skunky's specialized diet. Back outside, Shadow had moved closer to Skunky's enclosure, the two bobcats regarding each other through the wire mesh, their noses almost touching in a silent communion. It was this extraordinary, unprecedented tableau that sparked an audacious idea in Montes's mind. Instead of attempting the near-impossible task of coaxing a terrified, injured wild bobcat into the carrier, he cautiously opened a rarely used maintenance door on Skunky's enclosure, a separate, smaller section that could be securely closed off from the main area, specifically designed for safely cleaning the enclosure. "This is either brilliance or utter madness," he muttered to himself under his breath as he placed the tempting raw meat inside this segregated area and slowly backed away. Whether drawn by the promise of food and the relative shelter from the relentless storm, or the familiar, comforting presence of Skunky just inches away, Shadow eventually limped into the sectioned-off portion of the enclosure. With a swift, decisive movement, Montes secured the outer door, then carefully closed the interior divider, creating a separate but adjacent safe haven for the injured bobcat. Throughout the long, tense night, Montes anxiously monitored the unusual arrangement from the warmth of the cabin, the ever-watchful wildlife camera which he had quickly repositioned to view the interior of the enclosure, providing a constant stream of images. It showed the two bobcats lying on either side of the wire divider, occasionally touching noses delicately through the mesh, a silent acknowledgement of their shared predicament. At first light, despite the continuing fury of the blizzard, Montes made an urgent call to Dr. Lawson. "You have a wild bobcat in your enclosure," she repeated incredulously, after he painstakingly explained the extraordinary and somewhat reckless situation. "Deliberately. She was injured, caught in a trap. I couldn't just leave her out in this blizzard." Montes defended, his voice filled with a mixture of concern and perhaps a touch of sheepishness. "What should I do now?" There was a long, thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. Keep the divider securely closed. Do not interact with her directly. Remember, she is not Skunky. I will be there as soon as the roads are passable to examine her paw. If it's not a severe injury, we will treat her and release her back into the wild as soon as the weather improves. It took 2 long, anxiety-filled days for the treacherous roads to clear enough for Dr. Lawson to finally reach Montez's secluded property. During that time, Shadow remained surprisingly calm and relatively docile in her sectioned area of the enclosure, readily accepting the food Montez cautiously left for her, and seemingly finding a measure of comfort in Skunky's constant presence just on the other side of the wire divider. Dr. Lawson arrived with tranquilizer equipment and a full array of medical supplies, fully prepared for the difficult examination of a terrified and potentially aggressive wild animal. To everyone's considerable surprise, Shadow required only minimal sedation, allowing them to carefully treat her injured paw with relative ease. The damage is mostly superficial, Dr. Lawson confirmed, gently bandaging the paw. Some bruising and minor lacerations, but thankfully no broken bones or tendon damage. She's incredibly lucky. She paused, observing how even in her sedated state, Shadow instinctively positioned herself to maintain visual contact with Skunky through the mesh. And this behavior, it's absolutely fascinating. I've never witnessed anything quite like it between adult bobcats that aren't related. Once Shadow had fully recovered from the mild sedation, the initial plan was to simply open the outer door of her section of the enclosure and allow her to leave whenever she chose. But nature, it seemed, had other plans in store. Another powerful storm system unexpectedly moved into the region, blanketing the area in fresh snow and keeping Shadow in the relative comfort and safety of the enclosure for several more days. During this extended, unplanned stay, Montez observed the deepening, almost unbelievable connection between the 2 disparate bobcats. They would engage in a unique version of playful chase along the length of the divider, sleep pressed against opposite sides of the wire mesh, and even share food. Shadow once ingeniously pushing a portion of her rabbit through a small gap in the mesh to Skunky's side, an unprecedented behavior that left both Montez and Dr. Lawson, who reviewed the captured camera footage with astonishment, completely speechless. It's as if she knows he's disadvantaged, Dr. Lawson remarked, shaking her head in disbelief. This completely contradicts nearly everything we understand about solitary predator behavior. When the relentless weather finally cleared a full week later, Montez cautiously opened the outer door of Shadow's section of the enclosure as planned. To his considerable surprise, she made no immediate move to leave. She tentatively explored the opening, ventured out briefly into the crisp winter air, but invariably returned to the familiar safety of the enclosure before nightfall. This unusual pattern continued for several days. Shadow would leave for increasingly longer periods exploring the surrounding woods, but always returned, usually bringing small prey that she would share with Skunky through the wire divider. It was as if she had somehow established the enclosure as a part of her own territory with Skunky as her unlikely cherished companion. After extensive consultation with state wildlife authorities and securing special unprecedented permission, Montez and Dr. Lawson decided on an unorthodox experimental arrangement. They carefully modified the enclosure to include a discreet one-way entrance that would allow Shadow to come and go freely, while effectively preventing other potentially dangerous wildlife from entering the secure space. The divider between the 2 sections remained in place, ensuring the safety and well-being of both Skunky and Shadow, giving her the essential freedom her wild nature demanded, while allowing the truly remarkable relationship between the 2 bobcats to continue to flourish. Spring arrived in the Blue Ridge Mountains with an explosion of vibrant new growth and a flurry of wildlife activity. Shadow's comings and goings became a regular, almost predictable part of life at Montez's property. She would disappear for days at a time, undoubtedly pursuing her wild instincts and hunting, then invariably return to spend hours, or sometimes even overnight, in her familiar section of the enclosure. Montez continued his increasingly popular educational programs, now occasionally featuring Shadow, when she happened to be present teaching captivated visitors about the fundamental differences between wild bobcats and those raised in captivity due to disability. The unique and heartwarming story of Skunky and Shadow attracted the attention of local wildlife conservation groups, who provided additional resources and invaluable support for Monte's growing wildlife education initiatives. One warm May morning, as the forest canopy was a symphony of emerald green mantes, awoke to an unusual chorus of soft, high-pitched sounds emanating from the enclosure. Intrigued, he quickly checked the live feed from the wildlife camera on his phone. The image that greeted him left him utterly stunned. Shadow had returned overnight, but she hadn't come alone. Tumbling and playfully chasing after their mother's every step were two tiny bobcat kittens, their spotted fur a miniature echo of their mother's wild beauty. "She brought her babies to meet him," Dale said with a sense of profound wonder when Montez excitedly called to share the extraordinary development. "She trusts you both that much." Over the following weeks, Shadow continued to bring her precious kittens to the enclosure regularly. Under her watchful, protective gaze, they would engage in playful pouncing and batting games along the length of the wire divider, while Skunky watched with an apparent fascination from his side of the mesh. Sometimes, when the energetic kittens were finally lulled into a peaceful nap, Shadow would deliberately position herself by the divider, where Skunky could reach through and gently groom her face, the two adult bobcats sharing a quiet, intimate communion that transcended the seemingly insurmountable boundaries between wild and captive, disabled and whole. One peaceful evening, as the golden light of sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Montez sat on his porch quietly observing this truly unusual blended family. Dr. Lawson joined him after completing Skunky's routine quarterly examination. In 30 years of wildlife medicine, she admitted, her voice filled with genuine awe as she gestured toward the enclosure where Skunky was gently batting at a fallen stick one of the playful kittens had managed to push through the mesh. "I have never ever seen anything remotely like this. By all conventional wisdom, none of this should be happening. A blind bobcat shouldn't be thriving as remarkably as he is. A wild female bobcat shouldn't be voluntarily associating with a human-maintained enclosure. And she certainly shouldn't be bringing her vulnerable kittens here." Montez smiled softly, his mind drifting back to that misty morning in the Blue Ridge Mountains, when he had discovered a tiny suffering creature that everyone, including the most experienced professionals, had deemed unlikely to survive. Maybe, he mused quietly, conventional wisdom doesn't always account for the exceptions, or for the profound power of simple compassion. Dr. Lawson nodded thoughtfully, her gaze following the graceful movements of Shadow as she nuzzled her playful offspring. "Yours certainly changed Skunky's life. And maybe," she added, a hint of wonder in her voice, "maybe his changed Shadow's perception of what's possible. And now, they're both changing ours." As if sensing his name on the gentle evening breeze, Skunky turned his head unerringly toward the porch, his sightless eyes somehow finding Montez with an almost magical accuracy. The bobcat then made the special, soft chirping sound he reserved only for his beloved human caretaker. The very same faint cry Montez had first heard echoing through the underbrush on that fateful, life-altering morning. It struck Montez then, watching Shadow gently guide her playful kittens through their innocent games, that sometimes the smallest, most selfless acts of kindness could create ripples that extended far beyond their original intent. His simple decision to help one small suffering creature had unexpectedly blossomed into this extraordinary arrangement. A blind bobcat serving as an unlikely ambassador for wildlife conservation, a fiercely independent wild mother finding an unusual ally in her challenging world, and himself discovering a profound sense of purpose that had eluded him for so many years. The unexpected surprise. Montes murmured, a gentle smile gracing his lips as he remembered how he had once envisioned nothing more ambitious for his life than crafting beautiful furniture and enjoying quiet fishing trips with his brother. Now he found himself at the very heart of something far more meaningful, a unique and improbable bridge between the human and natural worlds, built on the enduring foundation of unwavering compassion and mutual trust. As twilight deepened into the soft embrace of night, the two tiny kittens finally succumbed to exhaustion, curling up trustingly against their mother, who stretched out contentedly along the familiar wire divider, allowing Skunky to maintain his comforting tactile connection through the mesh. Montes remained on the porch long after Dr. Lawson had quietly departed, his heart filled with a profound sense of gratitude as he witnessed this extraordinary tableau of unlikely connection. This unexpected family that had formed around a single act of kindness in the heart of the untamed wilderness. A valuable lesson. This remarkable story reminds us that compassion knows no species, and that even the smallest acts of kindness can have profound and far-reaching consequences. By opening our hearts to the vulnerable, regardless of their wild or seemingly different nature, we can create unexpected bonds and witness the extraordinary resilience and adaptability of life. Sometimes, the greatest lessons we learn and the most meaningful connections we forge arise from the most unexpected circumstances. What are your thoughts on this incredible story? Please share your comments below. And if you enjoyed this tale of interspecies connection and the power of compassion, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories of the natural world. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming content. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story?